Welcome to today's Leadership Virtual Panel session. My name is Dr. Vicky Gardner and I am the Canberra Manager of the ACS. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the lands on which we are meeting today. In Canberra here where I'm situated, we are on the Ngunnawal land. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians as our first scientists, engineers, technologists and inventors. And it's through their stories that we are now benefiting from technologies and learnings, and this is how we should be able to move forward and appreciate that learning myself. I wish to acknowledge and welcome any First Nations and Torres Strait Islander people who are on this call today. Just before we get started today, I just want to introduce the ACS to you for those who may not be members of the ACS. We are the leading professional association for the technology sector, and our purpose and vision is to advance technology for Australia. We do this by setting the standards for Australian technology professionalism and skills development, supporting our Australian technology professionals and organisations to succeed and successfully compete in a global environment, and to focus on the positive impacts that technology has on our community. We create value for our members and society in 4 different ways. We help those who are coming into Australia to help build that 1.2 million workforce by 2027 through our migration and professional year programs. We support people throughout their careers, no matter where they are, from aspiring to retiring. And we set the standards and provide a number of educational opportunities for all of our members throughout their career. And finally, each of our branches is here to help build a community of technology professionals. And we enjoy that you're all welcome to come as part of our community at any point in time. Each of our branches is located in, or each state and territory has an office within their location. And for us, we're really proud and excited to have recently opened our ACS Canberra hub. And we welcome anyone to come and visit us when they're visiting Canberra at any point in time. Similarly, there are hubs in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, and members are very welcome to pop into those hubs and use them as drop-in points at any point in time. So with that housekeeping, we have a few things for our webinar. For us to help us identify your attendance, can you please make sure that you have your full name displayed and using the name that you've used for registration. It goes without saying that if you, the best way to get the best out of this webinar is to put all distractions to the side. And when we do get to question time later on in this evening's session, you can either type your question into the chat, or we can you can put your hand up and we'll do our best to get to you during the session. For those who are joining on webinar or iPad, please note that there are some limitations to what you can see on your screen. And also when those who are looking, keeping an eye on when the CPD points go back onto your profile, please give us about 2 weeks to get this uploaded from tonight's session. Tonight's session is supported by SS&C Blue Prism, and I'd like to thank them for their support and ongoing contribution to our professional development program. Tonight, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Darren Cockrell, who is the Head of Solutions Consulting at ANZ at SS&C Blue Prism, and he's also going to be tonight's panel facilitator. Acting as the SS&C Blue Prism's technical solutions subject matter expert throughout both sales and implementation cycles, Darren works with SS&C Blue Prism customer office, sales and technical teams to provide strategic guidance and bring to the fore underlying opportunities for private and public sector clients to understand the latest developments by providing thought leadership in robotics process automation, intelligence and cognitive automation. So I will now hand over to Darren to introduce SS&C Blue Prism further and to facilitate tonight's discussion. Over to you, Darren.
Great, thanks very much, Vicky. So hopefully you can all hear me. I double checked my mute button. Now I've just got to make sure I take over correctly here. So yes, as Vicky mentioned, I'm just going to jump across just to give you a bit of a very quick overview of what SS&C and also Blue Prism's about and what we do, and also a bit about the market itself. So just before we get into the panel itself, so I'll jump straight into it. Firstly, why are we all here? Why do we want to, what are we focusing on today? The first thing I want to sort of point out is where this industry is heading as a whole. So the actual intelligent automation market as a whole is still very early on. There's a lot, there's a lot of growth to go in this space. And as you can see from here, you know, we're heading towards, in the late 2020s, is around the 25 billion mark for global global market in this space. And, you know, a lot of departments and companies are still just dipping their toes in the water. We see some of our major companies in Australia still just dipping their toes in the water. So this is not something that's already in place. It's things like that. It's still very much growing in that space. And as for within there is what is the key aspects of intelligent automation, you can see there that it's still very much focused around RPA, robotic process automation, which we'll generally focus on today, but we'll widen that into these other areas such as OCR, which is document recognition, optical character recognition, business process management, AI, and so on. So they're all at different levels in the process, but it's more to do with what's available, what skills there are, what, you know, what's right for your industry or departments and things like that. But at the core, it's still that RPA, the robotic process automation, as part of that. So I'll move on now to what a bit about SS&C. So SS&C is a global organisation. They purchased Blue Prism, which is the RPA component, over 12 months ago, or sorry, around 12 months ago. And they are a large corporate organisation. So over 24,000 employees globally, which they actually manage around $45 trillion worth of money globally. And that's because they do, the SS&C themselves are a lot in finance and government and health across those. They're the main three sectors that they look into for that. And also a very large footprint in Australia, both with Blue Prism itself, with our team, but also in other regions of government and healthcare and funds. Okay, so also on this, what is intelligent automation? Why would you bother doing it? So that some of the key aspects here is being able to give your departments growth, to be able to look at increasing profitability. Now, that's obviously depends on what it is your department does, or if it's corporate business and so on. They're all these are all possible requirements that are at different levels depending on which department or market or company we're working with. One of the key things that doesn't jump out on these sort of slides that used to a while ago is everyone thought it's all about reducing headcount, right? It's about, oh, how do we reduce the number of staff? That's not what the focus is on, especially customers that are at scale, especially in our government departments and so on. It's more about, okay, there's things like, you know, the population's going to grow over time. We can't just assume that our department's going to grow at the same speed as that. How are we able to service our citizens better? Things like that. It's getting that return to be able to elevate the customer experience. So there's less things that are happening behind the scenes and more things happening with the citizens and so on. What do we do now as a whole? So it was when we were just Blue Prism, or I say just Blue Prism, but we were focused on the RPA sector and AI. it was more about tasks, more about we need to do this task. It takes 5 minutes to do. An operator enters some data into a terminal, and we just automate that. We just replace what they do on keyboard and mouse and do that task for them. So it stops a staff member having to do that repetitive task. Since we're now SS&C combined, we now look at business process, end-to-end processes that you have. So from when, for instance, a customer inquires about a certain requirement, might be change of address, it might be anything that's related to your department, till the end of that process. We now manage that with our business process management tools built in with RPA. So that end-to-end scalability with SS&C Blue Prism is now our key capability. So just on that, sorry, the slides are a bit changed colour slightly, I've noticed on here, but where we focus on is in automation and business process management. Our innovation space is definitely all about, and we've actually bringing out 2 AI products this month in things like AI and ML, computer vision, natural language processing, and especially now where pretty much all of our products are in the cloud as well. So very much as a service offering in all different facets of SS&C and Blue Prism. So it is quite hard to read in a few of those sections, but we do have over 20,000 customers globally, 120 partners, and we've been over 20 years in doing this. A lot of people think, oh, it's all new, it's all the latest things, but what Blue Prism does in RPA, it was called something different back then, but we started in 2001, so it's been quite a while, our journey in this space. So what I might do is I'll jump straight into our panel area. I don't want to, oops, sorry, too far. So yeah, that's a brief background, and we'll now move into the our panel. So what I'd firstly like to do is just introduce you to our 2 speakers today. So firstly, Pegah. So Pegah Ebrahimi is the Intelligent Automation Manager at the Department of Education, New South Wales, with a comprehensive background in financial services, higher education and healthcare. She has successfully executed complex automation projects with the goal of improving operational efficiency and business outcomes. In her current role, Pegah leads the Intelligent Automation team, with a focus on streamlining services and delivering digital transformation, thereby enhancing customer experience in over a million learners, which is approximately 2,200 schools, and also 170,000 employees across the state. We also have joining us today is Dr. Ian Opperman. Dr. Ian Opperman is the New South Wales Government's Chief Data Scientist, working within the Department of Customer Service, and is also the Industry Professor at the University of Technology, Sydney. Ian has 27 years experience in the ICT sector and has led organisations with more than 300 people, delivering products and outcomes that have impacted hundreds of millions of people globally. Ian, as a thought leader in the area of the digital economy and as a regular speaker on big data, broadband-enabled services and the impact of technology on society. Ian's contributed to 6 books, co-authored more than 120 papers, and has been cited more than 3,500 times over that journey as well. So thank you, Pegah and Ian, for joining us today. So what I'll do is I'll stop sharing the slides just so you, let me see, make sure I press the right buttons. Yep. Yes, looks correct. So hopefully everyone can see us very well, and we'll look to jump into it. So before I get into the questions for you, I've got some questions to go through. I'd just like to give you both, and I'll start with you, Pegah, on just if you could just give us a quick overview of yourself and what you see as driving operational excellence in shared services in your space.
Thanks, Darren. So we sit within service experience team at the Department of Education, and we're tasked with providing support services that are simple and easy to use. And at the Department of Education, we want to put our learners and educators at the heart and center of everything that we do. So we want to make sure that we're putting as many resources as possible into the frontline services, so meaning people who are directly involved in teaching. So to achieve this, we really need to address the inefficiencies in the back office. Sometimes it's through strategic long-term solutions, and sometimes it's through tactical solutions such as automation. And I think these two go hand in hand. Sometimes automation gives people the headspace and capacity to support the larger digital transformation. And the last thing I want to point out is that yes, we want to drive efficiency. Yes, we want to provide better services, but not at the cost of burning out our employees. And that's where automation plays a role. So by removing the tasks that are boring and people hate doing, we keep our employees engaged and satisfied.
That's great, Pegah. No, thanks for that. So now the same for you, Ian. If you feel free to have an open discussion on that, driving operational excellence in your area. So.
Thanks, Darren, very much. Hopefully I've unmuted myself. Government's a little bit different to many other organisations in that in some cases you don't get a choice of engaging with government. And then it's a matter of how well government can respond to that many interaction with it's the one to many but in reverse. So there are very often situations where people complete forms or complete documents, and those documents and forms they need to be processed, and processing times are quite substantial. And one of the things that's always being considered is how could you do it better, faster, cheaper, and actually produce something which is more sophisticated. There are examples such as when you submit a building plan for approval or for your plans for various different parts in the life of a building. One is, for example, to get advice about whether there should be any particular steps you take for fire efficiency or fire resilience. And the work of reviewing those documents is done by a human being. And there are 6,000 documents that come in a year, and a human being or a group of human beings or a team of human beings or a squad of human beings can only do that process so well. So one of the things we've been looking at are the different parts of government interaction with many, which can be automated, and which not only can we do an old thing in a new way, do things a little bit more efficiently, a little faster, but actually what else could we do if we could capture more information? So completely hypothetical example, if a building plan is submitted, rather than just assessing it for one sort of compliance or one sort of advice, if you could use it to create a 3D digital model of the building and then start the process of the whole of that building approval chain, the whole lifespan of the building before it's constructed, you could potentially do that with a digital model. So what we're looking at is not just doing things faster, cheaper, better, but what else could we do? What new thing could we do in a new way if we've got the ability to automate information capture, information assembly, and start to do some really important value add? And just to not overhype the expectations, this is something we're looking at, but it starts with the process of digitizing, automating, and then thinking about what next.
That's great. No, thanks for that, Ian. And with two children not far off looking at university, the term digital twins is starting to come around a lot in that space as well. So
I'm sure they've already got one.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Okay, no, that's great. Thanks, Ian and Pegah. So what I'd like to kick off with first, and I'll ask you, Pegah, this question first. What trends do you see emerging in intelligent automation over the next 12 months in your space?
So I think an easy answer to that is going to be an increase in adoption of AI and cognitive tools in the automation industry. So, you know, OpenAI and ChatGPT are quite the buzzwords these days, but cognitive tools have been around for a while, and we've been using different forms of it, from intelligent document processing, classification to, you know, voice recognition and sentiment analysis. But what I see really changing this year is an increase in trust in these tools and appetite to use these tools from your average worker. And I think this cultural shift is going to allow us to utilize these tools to drive efficiency across our organization. And even more than that, empower every person in the organization to use these tools to make their jobs easier.
That's great, and yes, you're very right there. That the thing that comes with AI is people need to build trust in their decisions. So, which are not always 100%. We've seen that in a few AI tools we all use day to day. So, Ian, there's the same question to you. What trends do you see emerging over the next 12 months in intelligent automation?
Well, the thing that, of course, has got everyone a buzz right at the moment are these generative AI solutions, which do some really interesting and clever things, and which allow you to assemble lots and lots of information towards a particular goal. And what we're seeing is increasingly that you can take a general request and get a general response. Increasingly, you can add context to it to get increasingly useful things out of this generative AI. So I gave you the example before of automating the process of capturing the information content in a document and then starting to build models and then starting to build on top of that. If you then throw AI in on top of that, if you've got data now in a digital world, if you've then got models that you can then interact with from a range of different perspectives, you can start to explore predictive capabilities, you can explore what if. If you throw AI in on top of that, then your ability to do things like find for me a weakness in the structure, find for me an area where there's a blockage, tell me about an anomaly in this building, tell me where there's something ambiguous in the design, which is going to subsequently lead to problems when the building is actually constructed. These are the sorts of things that AI could work around these different models and start to explore different scenarios. We had a conversation recently about power resilience, so resilience of the energy network during times of stress, during times of flood, during times of fire. And one of the things we have been talking about is if we could create models of the network and explore the resilience. So will this station stay up? Will it not stay up under different conditions of propagating fire fronts or propagating floods? Those are the sorts of things that we automate the information by capturing what's already there. It's the built environment. We build models, we feed into that the planned environment, we throw AI on top and say, tell us where the weak points are, tell us what would happen under the scenario of a flood moving or a fire moving. Those sorts of things are going to become relatively commonplace. And so again, we go back to the scenario, here's my plan. Tell me if there's any advice about this plan. Tell me if I'm compliant with the National Building Code. Tell me something else. And what you get back is, yes, it's all compliant. But under these circumstances, there are some other things you might want to think about. Or this is the impact it would have on the rest of the network for someone who's thinking from a network perspective. And those are the sorts of things that at the moment, when we add another base station or another power generating point to a network, there's a group of experts who sit there and use lots of spreadsheets and use lots of knowledge and real world experience to say, we think the range of parameters is this, and that's fine if you add one new site every so often. But if you imagine adding micro energy sites, wind, wave, solar, and you add tens of thousands of those, that's not the sort of thing that a group of experts will get through. That's the sort of thing that fine-grained, highly specific, highly detailed analysis is something which at least could be helped by AI, and you'd probably still want the experts to sign off. But it's the sort of thing that AI can do a lot of that heavy lifting.
Okay, no, that's great, Ian. So if you went to request funding for an extra 500 people to do that work, they won't give it to you?
No chance.
So yeah, that's a prime example. Is that's what it's about.
And realistically, you wouldn't find them. You would not find 500 experts. So it's not an option.
Yeah, that's right. That's great. I'll actually, the next question I'll ask back to you, Ian. What are some of the lessons learnt in your area from that first-hand experience that sort of, wish you knew before you started?
That's a great question. It's a really, really great question. 7.5 years ago, we started the Data Analytics Centre, and when I look back at that, it looked like we were building with little tiny Lego blocks. So do you remember the old Lego blocks where there were 1 unit or 2 units? It feels like we were building with that. Now you've got all these specialised pieces, these specialised tools. I would love to start again with all of the new tools that exist now. The single most important thing when I'm having conversations with people is to help people understand that the world has really changed. And some of the capabilities of modern tools and modern tool chains are what appear like magic, but in practice are real. So the thing that I really wish is to find the ways to ground people in the understanding of the current art of the possible, and that it is so different to what it was 5 years ago and especially 10 years ago. And that's true of almost everything in the world of data, analytics, and AI. So it may not quite be the question you asked, but the thing that astounds me is just how much things have moved ahead in the last few years.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, thanks for that, Ian. So also for I pose the same question to you, Pegah, is what are some of the lessons learned in your department and what in your journey that you've seen with first-hand experience?
Well, if I want to give recommendations for someone who is setting up their COE now, I would say that, getting your standards right, using templates, having a strict code reviews is going to save you a lot of time in the long run. And about getting buy-in from business, I would suggest that you speak to the business partner and talk about the parts of the job that they hate and automate that first. And about prioritization, I think probably it's a good idea to give the business the recommendation, but give them the power to choose. And I think the last thing that has worked really well for us is having close relationships and working closely with our IT department and having a governance forum in place where we raise our challenges and they support us to overcome those challenges.
That's great. That's great. And you often don't see those sorts of things on slides when it's it's internal slides about why are we doing this? It's about saving. It's about customer experience and that sort of thing. But what about the jobs that the staff hate doing? That's the repetitive button pressing work as well. So yeah, so that's great. Ian, with the next question, I'll point at you first with this. How has intelligent automation helped drive operational excellence in your department?
That's another great question. So there are many places where automation and intelligent automation can make a difference. And the obvious ones that I talked about were the many to one. So registration of birth certificates is a great example where there is a move not only to increasingly automate that process, so it's faster, it's more accurate, it's more repeatable, it's more consistent, but also to move to digital birth certificates, which is a really important step forward. So if you get a digital birth certificate, you are on the data, what we used to call the data superhighway. It's your entry point into the world of digital. It's your entry point into your digital twin. And there's a lot of other elements inside New South Wales government, in particular in customer service, such as Revenue New South Wales, where increasingly they're looking to process large amount of information and do things like find whether or not this entity is connected to that entity, connected to that entity, is actually connected back to this entity. There's a lot of automation being used to do heavy lifting. But the stuff that gets me really excited is after you do that automation, then the intelligent part of that automation starts to come to bear, and you can start to do some really interesting stuff. This may sound relatively unexciting, but New South Wales spends about $40 billion a year through its procurement arm. So it's a reasonable amount of money. Every item that gets procured gets tagged against a particular category of procurement. It's this, which is subset of that, which is subset of that, which is subset of that. And again, it doesn't sound terribly exciting. The process previously was a rules-based system where you take your ticket, you put it into the system, it goes against 1 million rules, and it pops out into one category. And those 1 million rules have been slowly but surely built over time, and they, as you might imagine, if you try to add the millionth and first rule, you're potentially doing some pretty serious weaving and knitting to get it right. The automation part of that is some clever algorithms, convolutional neural network and an adversarial neural network sort of working together, doing that processing, and all of a sudden, bingo, it falls into the right category. It does not take 3 months, it doesn't take a couple of people several weeks every quarter. It's done in literally minutes. That's intelligent process automation. But the really intelligent bit, let's say we don't want to use the category other anymore and we force categorization. And it's an interesting exercise to see the millions of dollars that go against other suddenly get split out into other areas. It's the art of the possible. And that's just a simple what if scenario, which takes seconds to explore, whereas once upon a time it would have been months of work for a team of people just to try that little experiment. Whenever we get data into a digital environment, when we're confident of the quality, when we're confident of its fitness for purpose, we can start to do some really, really useful stuff, whether it's exploring a building. Something the building commissioner was doing is understanding where every component of a building has come from, not just following the chain of procurement, which is the automation part, but actually understanding whether or not they're all genuinely what they say they are, and whether or not we run the risk of having flammable, combustible cladding on a building as opposed to legitimate cladding. That is unbelievably powerful versus what we did in response to the Grenfell fire in the UK was sift through all the data sets we had about a building, retrospectively try and build a predictive model about the likelihood of a building being at risk, and then send the poor folks at Fire Rescue out to test every single one of those buildings, to physically, mechanically, and combustibly test every single building, take a little bit of that cladding, go back and do a combustion test, which took literally months to do. It was essential work. People's lives were potentially at risk. And we found buildings that way versus the process of saying, I know where everything has come from. I'm able to track and trace every one of those bills of lading and the procurement components. And I've literally built a digital twin of this building. And my use case is it actually what it says it is? Is it safe? That's amazing.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And that's great that you're bringing the real life business scenarios into that automation. Like that's exactly what it's about. Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Ian. So Pegah, that same question to you is how has intelligent automation helped drive operational excellence in your department?
I think for us, it's all about, faster processing times. So I can give an example. So we automated few processes in shared services, human resources, and we ran an analysis of processing times before and after automation. And what we found is that even though the volume had increased between 50 to 100% in every month, in between 2020 and 2021 before and after automation, the number of transactions that were completed in less than 2 days had actually increased in most of the months. So we have a faster processing times when we automate things. And when we are talking about pay impacting processes or recruitment and onboarding processes, that translates into putting the teachers faster in schools so they can educate our learners, and that translates into operational excellency for us.
That's fantastic. No, thanks for that, Pegah. Now, before I jump into the next question, I'd just like to let the audience know, and Vicky also did in the chat, is just to make sure if you do come up with any questions during this, make sure you get them into the chat. You can raise your hand during the chat time in a little while, but you can also feel free to just enter in them at any time now, and we'll get to them shortly as well. So I'll actually, the next question, Pegah, I might ask yourself. Would you be able to give us an example of a process that you've done that's a quick win in your department that you were able to achieve?
Well, I would talk about one of the first processes that we automated. So the name of the process, all of our processes have name, and our robots have names too. So the process is called ABN cleansing. So what it does is that it's going to validate and updates the ABN and GST information in a master data by comparing the data from government websites. So it is a very simple process to automate, and people hated doing it. So it was a quick win for us. So what the result was that actually when it was done manually, it was only done once a month. But now that we've automated it, we run it daily, and that makes us more tax compliant. So even a quick win can be a good achievement and can increase your compliance.
That's great. No, good example. And Ian, the same question for you. Have you had? Could you give an example of a quick win of a process in your department? So
there are quite a few. I think I may have touched the quick wins, but I've got to say that procurement automation, the spend categorization automation, it really seems like an unexciting thing, and our cost benefit was compared to, it was literally 4 people working for a couple of weeks every quarter versus literally pressing a button and off you go. That automation was from a simple OPEX reduction. It was not terribly exciting, but what was exciting was the uplift in data accuracy and the uplift in what we could do with it. And $40 billion a year is a pretty serious amount of funds to have a better handle on. And the difference between being off by a couple of percent versus being off by a fraction of a percent really starts to add up in terms of the specificity of the data. It also means you can start to do things like, are we fulfilling our commitment to Indigenous businesses? Are we fulfilling our commitment to small to medium-sized enterprises? Are we fulfilling our commitment to regional versus procuring from regional areas? So it starts to produce a whole lot of other things which are connected to the simple OPEX savings. Suddenly enables a whole lot of greater confidence, just simply because we've got better data quality and just simply because we've got a better handle on all the different organs of what it is we're trying to do. There are lots of little examples like that, and they typically, I've seen another one where we have timesheets, and there are still parts of the government which have timesheets completed by hand in some cases, and the process of those being automated and then categorised and then appropriately cross-checked. Again, it's the sort of thing that's out of the world of dull, dirty, dangerous. That is dull. That is really, really dull. And the benefits of the uplift in accuracy are modest. Thousands of dollars worth of benefit, maybe tens of thousands worth of dollars worth of benefit, but more now we can start to say, have these people working in this area, have they exceeded the total shift hours they should exceed? Do we have a work health and safety risk now? Are we pushing people too hard in these areas and potentially create a hazard? So it's the knock-on benefits of a better understanding of what's actually going on, which is really the exciting stuff. And then, of course, throw AI in and you're off to the races in terms of capabilities.
No, that's great. No, thanks for that. And that's a good example where when people look at these processes, they look back on them and go, wow, we could do so much more with this. Why don't we do this and this and this?
Honestly, when people have been doing the new way for a while, they look back and say, why on earth did we ever do it that way?
Yeah, that's right. And we see that in a lot of customers as well, because this process mightn't have changed for 20 years in some scenarios, and when everyone looks at it, suddenly everyone's got 20/20 vision of the process.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, that's right. So next question, Pegah, I'll point this back to you first. What are some of the best practices and strategies you've adopted in implementing intelligent automation?
So one of them is focusing on key arms of automation, so meaning discovery, development, and run. So we have a lead for each of them who will help us to maintain a healthy pipeline, make our development a standard, and optimize our run. So these 3 leads together form the design authority and make sure we're following the best practices. And then the other thing that we've done is training our business users and upskilling them in Blue Prism and other sort of AI and cognitive tools. So by doing that, we've gotten more buy-in from the business because they have the control of their processes.
That's great. Thanks for that. That's good to hear, the governance in place. I'll now across to you, Ian, and the same question again to you is, what are some of the best practices and strategies you've adopted in Department of Customer Service?
Yeah, so Pega has mentioned standards a few times, and I've really held back because I love standards. I just love repeatable patterns of use, whether they are consistent within government, nationally consistent, or genuinely international standards. And so one of the things we're really, really pushing hard for is don't reinvent. Don't reinvent. Find patterns of use which you can apply. And this is a generalization of the question, so please forgive me. The thing that I'm most passionate about is data sharing and use, and data in any form. Data which we capture from forms that we run through automation processes, data which we capture from sensors, data which we capture from all sorts of different administrative systems is useful, provided you know where it's come from, you understand the chain of custody as to how it got to you and the chain of authorizing frameworks, you understand enough about the data quality to make an assessment of fitness for purpose, and then you can provide guidance, restrictions, prohibitions on how the data product that you've created is used. The data product, anything from a chart to a report to an alert, an alarm, a decision, or an action, depending on how far you move up that automation chain or how far you move up that intelligence chain. The patterns of use across the data lifecycle are so important, given that every data set is unique. You can use data sets in an infinite number of ways. Every time you change context, you change the sensitivity or potential uses of the data. Every data product you create is unique, and every time you change context around the data product, you again change how that data product could be interpreted or the sensitivities. And of course, data products and the data itself have potentially infinite life cycles, connected or disconnected from each other. People get stuck in the complexity of all of those infinites. And so the best thing we can do is try to capture the context of which is unique to your circumstance, but then use a repeatable pattern during that data lifecycle for capture, for storage, for organization, for use, and then for that guidance, restriction, prohibitions. Those patterns are actually repeatable. And that's the thing that I'm personally pushing really hard for inside New South Wales Government. Quick plug for the Australian Computer Society. They published the 5th white paper, technical white paper around data sharing and use patterns at the beginning of February this year. It's the Women's Weekly Cookbook of Data. This is the how-to. There are recipes on every page, but it acknowledges those unique, infinitely complex, infinitely variable possibilities when you think about general data sharing, and tries to help you work out which one of those patterns you need, which one of those recipes you can use for your context. So coming back, Pega triggered me on standards, so I'm starting to talk about standards, that the repeatable patterns of use driven by your understanding of the entire data lifecycle from the capture point all the way through to the use point, and then whatever it's after you, are the really important repeatable patterns to get used to. Otherwise, people just get stuck, or they come up with really bespoke, one-off, not repeatable ways of sharing and using data. And that's just debilitating when our whole world is driven by, informed by, and kept alive by the use and sharing of data.
That's great. No, thanks for that, Ian. It's good to get the two perspectives on the business side of best practices and looking at the data itself, which is very important in the process as well. So just before we finish, I do have one last question, which I'll go back to you, Ian, on this before we get into Q&A. So still think about those questions, everyone online. So my final one is, do you have any examples where you've actually used artificial intelligence to solve a problem, Ian?
Yeah, so let me give you a glib one first of all. So I was asked to write a speech recently. So it was a tricky speech, which was quite sensitive, so I didn't. I asked ChatGPT to write it for me. And I then stood next to a presentation which was flipping away in the background and keeping everyone amused as I said whatever I wanted to say. And it was a great way of having AI as a co-pilot. And I got to ask all sorts of outrageous questions of ChatGPT. It gave me back some pretty sensible answers. That speech is publicly available, by the way, if you're interested. And I got to walk the safe line of a public servant saying nothing and just being able to say, ChatGPT said that, not me. That was a bit of a squib, but really what we're doing in New South Wales government, there's lots and lots and lots of uses of AI across all of government. There are early alert systems which are looking at natural language processing of social media feeds. Is this a real fire? Is it not a real fire? How can we build confidence in it? There's simple natural language processing being used. Anyone who's used a New South Wales government website will know that there's a thumbs up, thumbs down at the end, or on every website. There's also a place to leave comments. So we've got a natural language processing tool just reading the comments. So every comment gets read, good, bad, or otherwise, it gets read. They get categorised, and then some of them get flagged for human beings to read. New South Wales has also got an automatic camera detection activity. There's a camera that takes an image of every single car that passes underneath. The AI says passenger driver, if driver, holding something, not holding something, if holding something, chocolate bar camera. And if it's likely to be driver holding something which is likely to be a camera, that goes to a human being. It used to be the commissioner who would decide whether or not there was a fine to be issued. So it's happening all across government. And what's great is we've established our AI assurance framework, which says if you're going to use AI, operational or not, these are the things you must consider. These are the things you must be able to write responses for. These are the things you must be able to explain how you've built in place the appropriate assurance against potential harms and thought through potential harms and done your piloting before you scale.
Right. Okay. No, that's great. No, thanks for that, Ian. And I suppose not all of us are happy with the AI in detecting people driving with their mobiles. It's a good safety feature, but the fine when it turns up isn't the greatest. So
I got caught.
So lastly, for you, Pegah, have you had any success in a process with in artificial intelligence at all?
We do. So we have a process that receives 40 different types of forms via email. And each of these forms, have different formats, file types, are different qualities. Some of them are scanned, I can't even read them. But we use AI to extract the information in these forms and recognize the form type. And then based on the form type, we assign them to different processing teams. So that helps us get these forms and requests to the processing teams faster.
That's great. No, that's excellent use of the OCR and that AI within the organisation. So look, thank you very much, both of you. I will hand it back to Vicky now for Q&A time. I see a few questions there, but I'll let Vicky go through them.
Okay, look, thanks, Darren, and thanks for a really interesting discussion. Ian, I'm going to have a chat with you about using your mobile phone while driving, I have to say.
I've learned my lesson. Honestly, I was just checking something, but I thought fair call.
Was it that ad is just 1 second? That was all it takes.
That's right.
So on more lighter notes, there's 2 questions from Sunil. They're both actually for Ian, but I'm sure Pegah may be able to contribute to the conversation as well. Hi, Ian. While the endeavour is to help automate and have intelligent processes, can we have your opinion about process mining?
Sorry, process mining. Right. I'm not quite sure what's meant by that in this context.
So okay. I'll help with that because that it is on the so looking into data for processes that could be automated throughout the organisation.
Okay. Thank you. So in general, I think it's a great thing to do. One of the things that we often don't know is where to look, and we also tend not to know. We tend to have a fairly narrow view about the world in front of us, and one of the things that they often find of saying is that if you think you control a process end to end, then you just haven't looked far enough on either side. So being able to look outside your own scope for a broader process to look at, and which ones of those are amenable to complete automation, to a bit of assistance, to some light assistance, I think in general is a great idea. And I think it also helps us to uncover some of the complexity of real world systems, which don't necessarily flow in linear fashion, but have all sorts of branches and loops when things go wrong, or when unexpected or non-usual things start to happen. And that's where you really can waste a lot of time, frustrate a lot of people. And if you've got a better mapping of that, you can do a better job of that automation and next best action type activities.
Great. Peggy, did you have anything that you wanted to add to the question?
Yeah, I think process mining actually reveals like great insights about how many variations people take in performing the same process. So I've been looking at, some of the results, and it looks like, it's the same team, the same process, but different people are acting differently. And then it reveals the bottlenecks and everything like that. So traditionally in our PA space, we use the knowledge of maybe a couple of SMEs to identify the processes and assess the processes. But when you go to process mining, instead of 1 or 2 SMEs, you can involve more people and then look at all of the variations. Therefore, you can improve the processes better.
Yeah, and I think that's really true, isn't it? Because not everyone always comes to the same problem with the same approach. So it gives you a much better answer through the automation piece. Sunil also had a second question. While there is a high focus on intelligent automation, should we in parallel explore more self-service options for customers and fulfillment done through STP?
So yes, yes is an answer. I'm sure Peggy will have a lot more finesse for this, but there's typically not one right solution for every process, or the solution might offer for a particular process may well change over time. It may not be worth the effort, and so looking at a couple of different ways of viewing things in its current state, it's always a good idea. Peggy, could you please save me?
Yeah, I was going to ask what the STP means, actually.
Straight through processing.
Yeah.
Okay, so Phil has come through with another question. I wonder at the collecting large amounts of data because we can, rather than because it is required or useful. I have noticed an explosion in data recording and entry requirements for endpoint staff, which is creating a time burden. Information creation and entry still requires a person to create it. Is it not also about eliminating unnecessary data collection and creation?
Can I leap in with the New South Wales government response and then pass to Peggy? So we're getting better at it. We're getting better at working out what data we need. It used to be the case that you collect data because that seems sensible, and that's the way we've always done it, so we keep doing it. There's now a much greater emphasis on, do you actually need that data? Is it appropriate that you would ask for it, and are you using it? And now, as public servants, every year we have to do compulsory training that asks those questions and it brings to the fore, do you have the right to ask? Are you actually using it? Would people reasonably expect for this data to be requested of you? And is it within the authorising framework that you've got? So we're trying to New South Wales is trying to get better at it, but and for example, whenever I go to another state, when I get asked to give a copy of my driver's license, I think you don't need to know that. You just need to know whether, for example, I'm over 18, or you need to know whether I'm validly licensed to drive a car. You don't need all the information in my driver's license. So what New South Wales is trying to do is currently invert the problem where you have data about you and you allow New South Wales to access the data to ask a question. So if this truly comes to fruition and it's relatively ready, the idea is that I can credential you to ask a question about my data, and you won't see the data, but you can ask the question, am I over 18? I am, by the way. Am I licensed to drive a car? Yes, I am. But you don't need to know my birth date. You don't need to know all the details about my driver's license. So we're getting better at it, and we're about to go through a transformational shift in New South Wales, exactly because we should not be gathering data just for the sake of it.
Great, thanks, Peggy. Do you have anything to add to that as well?
So I think one strategy that we've got at the Department of Education is collating all the data. So I think one of the reasons that we're asking our customers to input the data over and over again is that these systems don't talk together. So if in the backend we can collate these data, and once someone logs in, we can even pre-populate the data for them, I think we can reduce the burden on the users for entering this data.
Great, thank you. And Darren, they're the only questions that we currently have. Except
sorry,
actually, there's probably one more. There's one more quick one. Just a bit of because we do have a number of aspiring professionals on the call as well. It's just a bit of a thought on what are the most sought, or your thoughts on the most sought after and careers of the future in this space.
I can take that one. So I remember I read somewhere, and it always sticks in my mind, that in today, you know, like back then we used to, like in terms of learning, we used to build houses, but now we should only live in a tent in terms of learning. So I think the situation is changing, and the relevant courses and the relevant learning are changing so much that we can't build a house and, you know, live off it for the next 20 years. So I think get any engineering, science degrees, anything that you're passionate about. And then once you start a career, you're going to learn a lot of things on the job and be open to learning new skills, getting new certifications. I don't think we can give an answer that's going to be relevant in the next 10 years.
So if I could build off Pega's analogy, I think I like it. I would say that the thing to do is to build foundations and then keep changing the top of the house. Being flexible is absolutely essential. Having good, solid foundations, learning how to learn, and developing a structured way of thinking, I think is very useful. But the problems we really care about are not problems that engineers will solve. They're not problems that policy people are going to solve. Sorry, someone fraudulently is calling me. That's a good use of AI. They are not things that any one discipline is going to solve. They're going to be things that need people to come together. So the ability to learn how to collaborate is also, I think, a really fundamental element of what we need to do. We definitely need engineers to tackle some of the biggest problems facing the world. We need the Australian Computer Society. We need people who've got hard skill, but we also need humanisation. We need people who can remind us that we're doing this for human purposes. And we need people who think to plant trees and to put aesthetics into our world so we can remain, hopefully, in a very human-centred world as we move forward. So the basics, Pega's right, but I tweak the analogy and say what we want to do is build foundations and then regularly redesign what's on top of them.
And Ian, that's actually a really nice way to bookend my whole day, having had a breakfast at the School of Cybernetics at ANU. So the starting conversation of my day was cybernetics, and that comment there was all around cybernetics, so thank you for that. So that's all in the questions. So I'll hand over to you, Darren.
Right, thanks. So yes, that's look. I just wanted to thank both of you. So just a reminder for everyone on the online that we had Pega Ibrahimi, the Intelligent Automation Manager from Department of Education. Thank you very much, Pega, for joining us today. We also had Dr. Ian Opperman, who's the Chief Data Scientist at New South Wales Government. Thanks very much for your time today, Ian.
Pleasure. Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
No problem. And back to you again, Vicky. Thanks.
Thank you. And so really what I'm just going to do is just wrap up the session for today. Again, thank you to SS&C Blue Prism for your support for tonight's panel. I think that the conversation was exceptional, some fantastic facilitation there, Darren. I hope everyone has enjoyed tonight's session. What I will do is encourage you to all go to the ACS events page to look at some of the upcoming events that we're having, both in Canberra here in particular at our new hub, but across the network. I can see that the slides are coming up. Just 1 second, please. So here are some examples of some of the sessions that are coming up. For those who are interested in learning more about the skills framework for the information age, and a lot of this has data data skills in it now with the new version. That's really going to be quite a good session for you to attend as well. So on that note, I'd say thank you for joining us all this evening. Thank you to SSC Blue Prism, and also thank you to our two panelists tonight, and I hope that you all have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.